Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Atomic Mass Transmissions Live. Today I'm going to be diving into one of my favorite things about miniature painting, and that is dioramas. I love trying to tell a story with miniatures and scenery and a backdrop, and it's as opposed to just designing something and painting something for gameplay. This particular project is mostly going to be for display. However, I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time showing you how I'm going to add some magnets to some of the miniatures, so I can pop them off of this diorama if I wanted to, and put it onto a regular gaming base so I can use those in a game. So we're going to be covering Yoda versus Dooku, one of my favorite lightsaber duels in all of Star Wars from Attack of the Clones. And I'm really excited to get dug into the whole thing. So why don't we switch over to the other camera and we'll get started. Okay, so this is kind of where I have started with this project. I've got Dooku and Yoda. Obviously, there's quite a size discrepancy here. And what I've done here is I have taken a lid from a juice bottle, which I thought had like a really cool kind of like side texture here on the side of it. And then I took a piece of plasticard, and see if we can kind of angle this in such a way so you can see it. And I carved in the pattern that you see in Attack of the Clones in the floor in that chamber on Geonosis when Yoda finally confronts Dooku near the end of the film. So the way that I achieved this is that I laid out all of the pattern in a digital program. So I used Photoshop and Illustrator, and I printed it all out on a piece of paper, and then I cut out the pattern. So this kind of shows like the cutout that I had before. So I just had all these ovals that were all kind of set up there to begin with. And then I cut all that out and I made a template out of this little piece of paper. Then I laid it over top of this, and then I just cut out all of the small little ovals that are in there and made a mark on the piece of plasticard. After that, going back in with a hobby knife, so after I've kind of like scored it down this way, you can then kind of go into each of these grooves, and because this is white, it's a little hard because of the glare. And then I would kind of angle it this way, and then I would just kind of scrape and chase these channels to define all of the pattern on the floor. Now there are obviously other options that you could go with if you wanted to try to achieve this yourself. If you had a laser cutter, access to that sort of thing, you could certainly lay it out and do it that way. 3D printing is an option. But I like to do stuff by hand, so I decided that I was going to just kind of do this old school and do it in a very kind of traditional manner. So I made this initial base section for this, and then I'm just going to glue this on top of this lid, and then on top of it I'm going to have Dooku and Yoda placed, and I think that I'll have Yoda kind of jumping off of a rock here. So I'll need to build some section back over here on the side where Yoda can kind of stand, so we can be a little bit higher up. And then I think I need a bit of a backdrop. So going back and watching that scene, what I often really liked is these kind of big massive archways that are in that chamber. So I took a piece of foam core and I cut out an arch, but I'm not 100% sold on the overall composition of it. So before I really commit to using this piece, I think it will probably be best if I get the miniatures kind of solidified on the base itself in relation to one another, get them all set up in such a way that they look really cool, and then I can kind of build around the scenery elements around them so that they will look good. So to do that, and kind of as I mentioned at the top of this, I want to be able to use Dooku in my games as well. So what I've done is I've essentially, I left this part separate for him just so I could finish some painting on him, but I put a magnet in the base here, and then I sunk a couple magnets into the bottom of his feet. So just to show you the process a little bit, I'm going to drill in another magnet and sink another one in here. That'll allow Dooku to be positioned on this base should I want to, and then I can just put in a little magnet here on the base itself so we could stand on the floor and look very integrated into the scenery. For Yoda, he's got a pretty small little foot, but he's jumping off of this rock. So what I've done is I made a small little rock housing for a magnet that can connect to the base here, and then I can glue this onto other pieces of scenery here to make the rubble outcropping that he can be jumping off of. So that's more or less the plan. So I think I'll just go ahead and get started with that whole idea. So in general, it's, these lightsaber duels I think are great. I love pairing off these characters against one another. You can really do some interesting stuff with your color palette. I mean, especially with lightsabers, because there's so many cool glow effects and things like that. So when we get to the painting part of it, I will probably explore a little bit of OSL and a little bit of atmospheric light, I think, to try to kind of set the scene a little bit. So this will be a two-part stream. I'm going to start today just mostly on the construction and kind of go over the general construction techniques, and then I'll be back here next Friday to hopefully wrap it up. So let's start off first by just committing to gluing this down here, because we're going to be certainly going back into this and drilling some holes into it to sink some magnets. So I'm just going to use a little bit of super glue here. And I don't want to get it too close to the edge, but I'm just going to kind of get it all across the section here. And then I used a compass to kind of cut out the design for this, just to get it about as circular as possible. I think that looks pretty centered. Looks good to me. Shift it over just a little bit. All right, cool. So this will be our plinth that we'll put everything on. I think this will look really cool. I might paint this up in some kind of stony gray, maybe put a little bit of shading and things like that on the side. Maybe I'll just go straight black. I have to kind of see after I've primed it to get a good idea of how it's going to look. So yeah, it should be definitely a good time. So let's start to sink some magnets into this base here. And for that, I've got a pin vise. So this is just a small hand drill. And on it, I have a 3 30-second size drill bit, which matches up with the size of these magnets that I have right here. So you can usually purchase magnets from a number of different sources, and they are usually set up in standardized sizes. And then it's a simple matter of just grabbing a drill bit that matches and is a corresponding size to drill your holes and stuff in there. So one thing that I kind of covered a little bit when I was working on the bunker that I was working on, a big bunker project that had some magnets in them, is I made this little tool. And this essentially just has a magnet sunk into each side of it. And what this does is it helps me keep the polarization of the magnets straight. So all of a sudden I don't find that I've glued one in and it won't connect. It will only connect one way. So this is essentially the base, which means that I will sink this into the base here, and then it will connect to the magnets in the feet to get everything all oriented correctly. So I'll be using this tool to do that. But first I need to drill a little hole here. So looking at Dooku, I chose these 3 30-second size magnets because they're small enough to fit in the bottom of his feet without actually kind of bleeding out over the sides at all. So right now he stands on there okay, but this one foot kind of sticks up a little bit. You can kind of see this one. So I just wanted to do 2 magnets just to really lock him down. So looking at the placement of that, and I'll go ahead and remove the top portion of them because we're only really concerned about the legs at this point, is you can kind of see where that is. You just kind of need to eyeball it. Sometimes if I really want to get the orientation and the alignment correct, I'll put a little dab of paint on the one magnet and then I'll press it to the other surface, and that will help me get my alignment sorted just right. Hurricane Girl knows what's up. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've gone through these, intense magnetization projects. Not that this was really an intense one, but one in which you were magnetizing a lot of things, and I've screwed up the polarity on the magnets, and then all of a sudden I have to rip things apart, and it's very frustrating. So I saw that tip on the internet, and I thought it was a great idea, so I decided to make one myself. So it's just made out of an old pencil, just drilled some holes into it, and set the magnets in there. And it certainly has helped me kind of keep things straight. So to get this started, I'm just going to use a hobby knife, and I'm just going to kind of drill a pilot hole here into the center of where this magnet is going to rest, and then just drill a hole with the pin vise. Yeah, you can also just keep all the magnets and stuff together. I think that, for me, it's just it's a little more foolproof. It's kind of however you want to go about it. Certainly don't need to be really complex, but it's when I'm just going back and forth and working on a lot of miniatures all at one time, I find that the having the tool that's really clear helps me keep everything all straight. Yeah, totally. You could use this going back up there at the top. Order of garlic bread. You could certainly use your dioramas as terrain for other things. I mean, I could make this into a small little platform or something like that. I think that I mentioned before on that bunker project is that I really liked how the walls could be taken off of the side. And if you didn't see that, I think we have that all backed up on YouTube at this point. So you could remove those walls and you could just use them as photo backdrops. You could use them for a number of different purposes. So I like this kind of terrain that serves multiple purposes, aside from just looking really cool. So yeah, I think for this one in particular, though, I'm just mostly going to design this to be set up for display. And then when I actually want to play a game, I can pop these miniatures off their bases and I can get them on the tabletop without any sort of problem. Okay, so let's see. So this is the lead head here. So that is going to be the orientation that I need for that. So I'm just going to go ahead and attach a magnet here onto the other side of my tool. And now the orientation will be right and it'll match up with that foot. I wonder if I actually, yeah, see, I switched the magnets in the feet, so they're only going to go together one way in particular, so no big deal. So a little dab of super glue down in here. We'll hold our magnet in place, and we can kind of slot it into the hole and get it to fit. You know what, I think the best way to do this actually, as opposed to using this tool, because I have like a little bit of a recess and I can't actually get that to go flush, I'm just going to go ahead and attach that to the foot and then sink it down in here and then slide it off. Push that down in there, and slide that loose. There we go. Push that down a little bit. We'll let that dry a little bit. And then, yeah, now Dooku can rest securely on the base, and then I can also pop him off and put him on to the diorama. So we'll set that off to the side. Let's get to work on some Yoda action here. So kind of as I mentioned before, I've got this little resting point for his rock outcrop. Normally he's kind of jumping off of a stump. It's kind of a Kashyyyk jungle-y themed thing. But I do notice I have like a little bit of a gap right here. So I think that I'll probably need to go back in after I've kind of cemented this piece onto the main diorama and add just a little bit of filler putty over the top. And for that, what I often use, there's a lot of different varieties, but I use a product called Epoxy Sculpt, and it's a two-part putty, much like green stuff. But what's really nice about it is when it dries, it is sandable and really almost hard as stone. So you can drill into it; it's not going to tear or rip, kind of like green stuff might. So yeah, if you're interested in that sort of thing, you could certainly look it up. There's some other alternatives, milliput. There's a lot of different things depending on what part of the country that you live in, but Epoxy Sculpt is one of my favorite materials. I use it for basing and stuff all the time, so it works out pretty great. Yeah, Mad Viola, super useful stuff. It's really neat. It's kind of water soluble. You can just it works like clay, so it's really good for gap filling. Highly recommend it. It's really cool stuff. Kind of buy it in like 1 pound or like 2 pound kits. You can get it in a little smaller kits. Sometimes hobby stores will carry it. I think even companies like Michaels and things might have it if you're in the States. So looking at this, I think that, looking at how we have these miniatures set up, we're going to have Dooku here in the front. Yoda's going to be hopping off this rock here, and he's going to be kind of jumping up. And I want to have this, whoops, I'll try not to knock him over. I think I probably want them about that high. So I think for that, I'm going to build up some of this base. So in that scene, Dooku kind of rips this big techie moisture condenser thing off of the wall and tries to throw it at Yoda. Yoda counters with the Force, throws it back at him. It's super cool. But there's a lot of rubble and things on the ground. And I think this will also kind of break up this floor texture. So this is, it's kind of 2 shades of gray. These like lighter ovals are kind of like a lighter gray, and these ones are kind of a darker color. But all of the wall texture is kind of that Geonosian kind of rusty red kind of color. So I'm going to have some of those things just kind of break up some of the ground cover here. And I think it'll also be nice because I can utilize those to kind of hide some of these areas here where my cuts were not quite as perfect or exact how I wanted them to be. So it's a nice little cover up, and that's oftentimes part of miniature painting and terrain is figuring out strategic ways of covering up small errors as you were working on it. So I want to build this kind of up a little bit, and I think I'm going to have a few of these rocks, and I've got these are just pieces of slate. I just have this kind of assortment of things of different size. I think it's important to have you know, a bunch of chunks of different varying sizes. So I've got like little small rocks here, these larger pieces of slate. These are actually pieces of cast plaster bricks and things that I've kind of broken up that I just kind of have in my bits bin. Lots of different options you have available to you, kind of whatever you wanted to use for this sort of thing. But I'm mostly just kind of lay it all out and just look at, you know, as the miniatures are standing on here, how it's all going to look, and just try to like strategize on the best way to make these two miniatures interact with one another and look, you know, compositionally pleasing as well. So kind of thinking, you know, Yoda up a little bit higher, maybe not quite eye to eye. I still want him kind of leaping up, and some acrobatic maneuver as we saw in the film. So it doesn't need to be too high. So looking at it here, I've got about, you know, another rock or two I need to place there, and I can glue that this kind of rock piece right here as I point with Dooku's lightsaber onto the rocks that I have down below on the base. So I just have to kind of commit to some of these, the placement of some of these things, and also have to bear in mind that, you know, I'm going to have this wall backdrop, and I don't really like how this one looks so far. Like looking at the film, the scale of the arch is like, it's really massive, so I can't really fit it on this small surface. It's pretty tiny. So I think I'll probably have it kind of bleeding off, but thinking ahead, that kind of rusty red color here is a backdrop behind Yoda is going to be a nice contrast. You know, Yoda's got green skin, he's got a green lightsaber, green and red are complementary colors. So I want to have, you know, a swath of this wall, like a section of that wall kind of behind him. So I think I'll explore this a little bit more and figure out the best way to do it. But I just have to bear in mind, like, okay, I need some area near the back of this to actually place the wall section and how that's going to attach. So something I have to bear in mind. So I'll just leave some of this space here towards the back kind of bare. I think the other thing I can think a little bit about here is, you know, I have this kind of very directional markings on the floor, and I want that to lead into one of the focal points. And in this case, it's going to be Yoda. So I want Yoda to kind of be standing along a line and be coming off of one of these rocks so that these ovals kind of lead up to him. I think that that's going to be a nice way to kind of draw the eye towards the miniature itself. So I'm going to try to consider that, and that will influence a little bit of my placement of these stones. But to get started, I'm just going to go ahead and commit to gluing one of these down about right where it is right there. I like how that looks. A little bit of super glue here. Let's drop it. Kind of locked in there. Killer Raptor 247. Yeah, we're going to be talking about Separatist stuff 2 weeks from today. So there's a whole bunch of new stuff coming out for the Separatists. We'll be announcing a lot of new products then. So you have to wait a couple more weeks for that, but it is on the horizon. It's coming very soon. And then those X-Wing fans out there, they're looking for some news on Fury of the First Order and Resistance stuff. That's going to be next Friday. So keep your eyes peeled for news on social media as to new stuff coming out. So I'm just going to kind of sprinkle some of these little things around a little bit and think about the overall placement. But I can't really have Yoda like leaned way back like that. Let's see if we can get a better angle so you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about. So if we're looking at this thing, I don't really want him like jumped that far back. I kind of want him tipped up a little bit like this, like he's leaping, about to strike, and maybe his eyes are pointed right at Dooku. So I need a little bit of a rock that's going to go underneath here on that other side. So a little bit of a wedge shape. So I'll kind of look through these selection of rocks and find something. And then anything that I need to do to kind of fill this in, I can easily do with some more of that epoxy sculpt, and I can kind of map all that stuff out and get it to match in there just right. Try to find like a little thin one, and we'll just put it underneath there, kind of underneath there like that. So let's try with that. We'll just kind of build it up as we go. This is all kind of a experimentation, just proceeding with this whole process as we go. I have a general idea for it, but you know, a lot of this stuff is when I'm trying to decide on the overall scene and how it looks. it's just a bit of trial and error. You just kind of, experiment and you put some things back and forth. So I think if I do something akin to that, we'll have him there, and then we'll have Dooku about here. It keeps falling apart. I'll have Dooku here. You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and commit to glue. I'm not fiddling with it. I don't really need to do that much more painting on the inside of that cape anyway. So as I mentioned before, this is definitely one of my favorite lightsaber duels. I remember actually seeing this in the theater, and everybody lost their minds once they saw Yoda pull out that lightsaber and start flipping around like a crazy acrobat. It was super cool. And that's just a scene that I think I'll always refer back to as just being like this kind of amazing experience in the theater. I loved it. Thought it was really cool. What are your favorite lightsaber duels in all of Star Wars? There's some pretty good ones. There's been some really good ones in the Clone Wars animated series too. Definitely a number of them that are quite memorable. Okay. Looking at it here. Yeah, totally. It was such an awesome moment. That was just super neat. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So we'll try to get this tilted up a little bit here so you can see it a little bit better. That seems about the right height. I want him just kind of almost like jumping over Dooku's lightsaber, like almost like he did like a low cut, thinking he was going to get this little short Jedi, and then he just leaps right over it and is about to put the chop on him. I like that a lot. So it looks cool. Yeah, these two miniatures, just even by themselves with their static posing, I think make for a cool pairing. Go ahead and put this section down here and get this kind of locked in. Now I will have some little gaps and stuff that I need to fill in on this, and I will do that with some epoxy sculpt here. Oh yeah, Ahsoka fighting the Inquisitors. Yeah, super cool. That was amazing. Ahsoka versus Maul at the end of the Clone Wars was amazing. The other one that stands out in my mind that I absolutely loved was the Emperor versus Maul and Savage Opress, because you just got to see how competent of a lightsaber wielder Palpatine was. I thought that was really, really cool. Cool. So you can kind of see here, I got some gaps and stuff in there. I'm just going to meld all that stuff together into like one big rock with some putty. But for now, let's work a little bit more on this composition and try to get this kind of dialed in how we want it to look. So right now, that's how we're doing. I think that's looking pretty cool. And I've got them kind of forward enough here. So looking at this, Dooku is going to have to be standing. And I think what I'm going to do here, just to get the orientation and stuff right, is I will show you what I was mentioning before. I'm just going to use a little bit of paint on these magnets, and then I'll place it on the base, because I'm just going to paint this base here in a second anyway. Well, not in a second, but later. But I'm just going to put a little dab of paint on the bottom of each of these magnets, and I'm going to use that as a means to get my orientation right. So a little bit of gray paint here on each of these, just to make sure we're getting everything all aligned correctly. I want Dooku to be in pretty close. Right there. Stamp that down, and now I've got two little dots there on the base, and that can guide where I need to drill my holes. I'll let that dry for a little bit. I think in the meantime, I've got a little bit of scatter and some debris that I can add here. I'll probably add some little tiny flakes of sand and stuff, but I want to commit to like the larger rocks first. And I think when looking at these, one thing that I generally strive to do is just space them at irregular intervals. So as opposed to just having like a rock here, very symmetrical, it's more interesting to me, I think, if you have like one, a little bit closer, a little bit further spaced out. It just looks a little bit more natural to me. So as these are very tiny things, tiny rocks, and I've got some uh, super glue here because I can't use plastic glue or anything else like that. What I'm going to do is take a little piece of scrap, got a scrap piece of plastic card here. I'm going to put a little pool of super glue on it, and I'm going to use that to dip my rocks into and then place them, as opposed to trying to place little bits of glue and things on the base itself. This will be a little bit more precise. Lock it down. That'll also kind of minimize any potential for me having like extra glue kind of splooging out off of the side or anything, or like uh, getting anywhere else where I don't really want it to be. So I kind of like that general approach when I'm trying to apply little tiny things like this. Really handy when you're doing things like static grass, tufts, and things like that. On Wednesday, Dallas did a really cool um, clone recon trooper and was doing some great stuff with the base and was adding some little sprigs of kind of grapevines and other little bits as scenic basing. So if you didn't get a chance to check that out, you should definitely watch it. He got a lot of cool stuff done in an hour. I was pretty impressed. Little bits like that. And generally, I like to kind of do things in odd numbers. I think just visually, it just appeals to me a little bit more. So kind of 1, 2, 3. So I think I'll probably like do 2 more rocks, maybe 5, something like that. And we can kind of get one spread out. Again, I don't really want them to be quite the same distance. So I'll try to put this one a little bit further away, way out here somewhere. But there's not, like a mad formula to it. I just kind of have my own personal preferences. Drop one of these little guys right here. Gluing onto my tweezers. There we go. Maybe 1 or 2 more. Yeah, like Stormtrooper precise. You got it. Hey, so yeah, Z Weibelsack 1988. You're asking about if we're gonna have our own page for news about Star Wars products. So the big deal that we have there is that we're working on a new website. The one that we currently have can't really support multiple game lines very well. So we need to kind of design and create something new. So we're kind of in this transitional period right now where we're mostly putting up everything on social media. We don't really have like a static web page to put all this stuff on. So that's really the best source for it. A lot of this stuff is going to be then picked up by a lot of people on Discord and other social media platforms. But we're definitely working on it. We want to get to a place where we've got a static place for all of our Star Wars information, get back to writing articles, doing a lot of cool stuff like that. But it just takes a little bit of time for us to get a website that we're really happy with. So we are definitely working on it, and we will have lots more news about that in the future. Yeah, of course. Yeah, no worries. I know that's a concern for a lot of people. They're just like, oh, there's nothing about Star Wars on the AMG website. Well, that website was designed before, AMG picked up the Star Wars games. So it's, a lot of complications and things like that have kind of come about. We're moving very fast. We're still really committed to trying to maintain, all of our releases and everything else. But in the meantime, we're also working on a website too. So you just have to kind of bear with us for a little while, but it is in the works, and we're looking forward to sharing that with you once it all is ready. Okay, so we've got Dooku there. I've got my little dots. So let's see how these guys are going together. Looking pretty good. I think, maybe I'm gonna tilt. I think now that I actually look at it, Dooku's lightsaber is like almost touching that rock, and I don't really like how close that is. So I think that was a little bit of a misjudgment on my part. So as a result, I think I'm going to turn Dooku a little bit. I'm going to place his other foot over here, so the sword is not quite touching like that. I think you just want a little bit of extra space. In the design world, we often call that a tangent or a point of tension, where you've got intersecting lines kind of like touching one another. So I think you want to have a little bit of space there. So I think that's just a little too close. I think it's going to look better if I tilt them back around this way. So I'm going to go back and get a little bit more. I'll just go ahead and scratch this little dot off. I don't really need this one anymore. Doesn't really matter. But just so I don't confuse it, I'm just going to go ahead and mark that off a little bit. Get a little bit more paint on the base there, and we'll make another mark just so we can get it all lined up right. This is kind of what I mean. It's a little bit of back and forth, just kind of deciding on and looking at how the parts go together. I kind of like to just build it up in a gradual way, committing to little elements and then making adjustments as I go, just to make sure that I don't get something that I don't like in the end. That transferred over. Yeah, that's good enough. Let's see where that is. So again, I'm going back to my drill bit here, 3/32 drill bit, and I know that I'm going to put one right here. We'll go ahead and drill that in. Slight pressure. And I like to use these hand drills because you're working with really tiny parts. I think if you commit to a power tool or something like that, it's just a little bit too unruly, and this is real slow and easy, and it's certainly safer in my opinion. Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think you're right. I think that having the eyes of the minis line up a little bit better is going to be really important too. This is a duel after all. They wouldn't be kind of like staring off into space as they are fighting for their lives, right? That intense kind of eye contact that you see in like old westerns or like old samurai movies when two people square off. I'm gonna just kind of drill that down until it is low enough, and I'll just test and see how all this sinks down in there. Is that gonna be low enough? Yeah, I think it should probably work. Push that down just a little bit more. Oh, I think I probably should have drilled a little bit deeper there. So I'm gonna have to pry that guy. Let's see if I can get a hold of this. Has anybody else in the chat ever done a diorama before? Is this something that you've thought about doing but never actually committed to it? And if you were going to do one, what do you think would be really cool? I mean, this is certainly a simple version of that, where you've got only a couple of characters involved, but you could do some massive epic battle if you wanted to. Something like huge and really really impressive with lots of vehicles and things like that. You can kind of take it about as far as you want to. Oh, I'm sure Morris 2017 has been thinking about that. Make some amazing terrain. Really good painter. I'm always impressed by their work. Oh, cool. Yeah, and anything that had like a cinematic equivalent, any of those other games kind of based on films and things. Yeah, there's just no shortage of inspiration there, right? Just these really cool cinematic moments that happen. Okay, I think that's probably good. So we got to make sure that we get our polarization stuff right. So I'm just going to go back to the old method of putting it on the foot first and then sinking it down in there. So this is going to be Dooku's front foot. It's going to be right here. That will sink in just like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So I like that. I think that looks pretty good. It looks like Yoda's just kind of barely cleared the lightsaber. It's got a little sense of danger, but you can see that lightsaber tip is not touching the rock like it was before. It was kind of like that, and that just doesn't look right to me. I think that you want this stuff to breathe a little bit. It's all about the negative space as much as it is the positive space as well. And then looking down the barrel, it looks like their eyes are a little bit more aligned now too, so that looks cool. So yeah, good decision, I think. A little dab of super glue in there. Might have gotten just a little bit too much. It's always a good idea to just have like a towel or a paper towel or something like that handy, just for kind of emergency cleanups and things. So I've always got one of those on my lap. Just such an occasion. turn this so their eyes are kind of locked. It's looking cool. Yeah, and then just some sort of backdrop here behind them. And I haven't quite decided, you know, like, do I go? I'm not really sold on how this thing just kind of like truncates at the top up here. You know, just this complete flat part. I think if I'd probably want to continue the arch. I like the ragged edge back down over here. I think that's going to look pretty cool, just to kind of suggest that the wall itself kind of trails off. It has a kind of a rocky texture to it, and then all this section here has got kind of more of a plaster look to it, I guess. And to achieve that texture, when I get to it, I'll be using excuse me, I'll be using some tile grout. So I've just got this big thing of tile grout that I use for filler for a bunch of stuff. It has like a really cool kind of sanded texture to it. You can kind of see that there. I don't know if it'll pick it up very much, but it's got a little bit of sand mixed into it, and it's really good for plaster and stuff. So if you're doing like Adobe buildings, like you'd see on Tatooine or Jeddah even, that's certainly a good material to utilize and have at your disposal. And it's pretty cheap. You know, it's like $5-6 and you can get a whole table's worth of stuff done with that. Cool. So I've got this the rear foot to do for Dooku as well. Although I could probably just get by with that front foot, and then I could actually even pivot him if I really wanted to. So maybe I'll just hold off on committing to that rear foot. You've kind of watched me drill magnet holes enough, I think, at this point. So I think I'll just hold off on that a little bit. So let's go ahead and we'll take Dooku off of here right now. And we'll take Yoda off of this section. And let's fill this section in here. So I'm going to use a little bit of that epoxy sculpt that I mentioned before. And you've got plenty of time today to kind of get where I wanted to be. Well, thanks, Alan, ABB Models. I appreciate that. I'm glad you think that that Legion is a far superior game. I certainly like it. I have a lot of fun playing it. I've been kind of doing that nonstop now that friends are vaccinated and things are starting to open up. I've just been playing lots of games of Legion, lots of games of X-Wing, getting a little bit of Armada in there from time to time as well. And it's been a lot of fun just to get this stuff on the table. I spent, you know, so much of quarantine just kind of kicked back, just working on armies. Month of May, Dallas, Will, Michael, and myself, we all painted up some new forces for that. So I've been adding to my droids quite a bit. I've been having lots of fun playing with Cad Bane and all this tricky stuff. So it's all that kind of hard work and dedication over, you know, quarantine is now paying off on the tabletop, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit. I imagine many people are in the same boat where they're finally getting all this stuff on to the table again. Feels good. All right, so I'm just going to cram some of this stuff in there, and we'll smooth it down a little bit. So this is that the epoxy sculpt that I mentioned before. You mix it in two parts. You got A and B. I can kind of show what it looks like here. So A and B, and you mix it in even proportions together. And it probably takes about like a half an hour or so to like really start to set up, but you leave it overnight and it will be really, really rigid. And you can carve it and sand it and just do a lot of stuff with it that you couldn't do with regular Kneadatite or green stuff. I've heard, you know, a lot of people are also really into milliput. I think that's kind of a similar material. I've not really used that very much, but it's on my list of materials to try. Just to think, you know, there's a number of different materials for these kind of tasks that all have their benefits and their drawbacks. This stuff in particular is very, very handy. So I'll mash it down there first and kind of get this rock all filled in pretty well. And I think I might even need to add a few more rocks because you're just thinking about like the proportion of this. There's probably a lot of rubble off to the side here, so I maybe put another couple rocks over here and just have it kind of heavily concentrated at this point, and then just start to slowly decrease in frequency of rocks and things as you get further from the base. or from this edge, I mean. I'll just use a sculpting tool here and just kind of fill all these little gaps in. Oops. Try not to drop stuff. And you can almost, I don't know if you can see it very well, but you know, just with a little bit of water on your tool, you can just really smooth this stuff out, no problem. So it's great for filling in gaps and things, and for scenic bases as well. I am definitely excited for the Magna Guards. I've been spending some time plotting and making lists with those. Yeah, all that stuff is going to be shown off in 2 weeks. So we'll be making the announcement on July 30th. You have to bear with us a little while longer. I know all your separatist players are chomping at the bit. You guys are all waiting to get your hands on more info for your beloved droids. And there's going to be a lot of it coming, for sure. And in my opinion, these are some of the best miniatures that we've ever for Legion. Very, very cool. Yeah, during Mini Stravaganza, we showed off a single mini Magna Guard miniature. Got a whole unit, a lot of different options and stuff in there, and some stuff some people have never seen before, so it should be very cool. And as I mentioned before, next week is going to be some info for all of you X-Wing fans out there. We'll have some reveals for the First Order and the Resistance. A little hole back in here on the back side. I'm just going to fill that in a little bit too. And I find with this stuff, it's really, really soft when you first put it down. Really, really mushy. So trying to get in there and sculpt any sort of hard edges or details like that is kind of difficult. So you probably want to just kind of let it set up for a little while. So I probably won't be able to put in a lot of the marks and things on these rocks like I'd really want them to. I'll just kind of put a few little dings and dents and irregular surfaces and stuff on here so it doesn't look completely smooth, but I'll be refining that as this dries a little bit more over time. Cool. So we've got Yoda's magnetic rock now they can attach to. As I mentioned before, there is a slight gap right there where you can see where the plastic meets the putty down there. So I'm going to put a little bit of some additional material up on top of that just to fill that in. A little bit right here along this side. Don't need too much. If I make it thin enough, it can go right over top of the magnet and it will still hold a good join, but I'm going to try to avoid that a little bit. Some of this stuff kind of placed on there. So the technique that I often use when I'm preparing for bases and stuff is I'll actually dip the feet, or in this case, this little extra rock into a little bit of water, and I can kind of depress it in there, and it can make a little indentation, so it'll make a nice kind of registration point. So these things will match up pretty well, and it'll fit right in there, and it'll fill in that gap that I had there before. A little bit of an excess there, so I'll just kind of clean some of that up, smooth all this stuff around. And this stuff won't really bind too heavily to the plastic, so I can probably just leave Yoda magnetize onto this to make sure that I've got everything all lined up how I want it to be. Cool. All right, so now we've got this component of it finished. So I think that we can probably start to think about what we want to do as a backdrop, because I really like how that looks. I think it actually makes this more into a diorama as opposed to two miniatures just kind of squaring off against one another. It sets the scene and the context. So I need to start to make some decisions about what this is going to look like. And I got about 15 minutes left for today anyway, but I'd like to kind of cover some of the basic technique and how I'm going to make this wall section today, so that when I come back next week, I can just kind of pick up from there, and then we can actually get into some painting and stuff. So I do like how I want to have, as I mentioned before, this is going to be kind of a red stony color, kind of like Geonosian soil, I suppose. So I want to have a fair amount of this stuff, thinking about it compositionally, that's going to be behind Yoda to kind of set them. So you kind of need to figure out like what's the optimum angle going to be for viewing, and it's probably going to be kind of square on like these two. So looking at that, you want to have kind of Yoda almost starting to break free. So I think that maybe that sort of width on the wall looks pretty good. Maybe we move it forward just a little bit more. But I think what I don't like about it is how, the top of this just kind of cuts off, and then how this section goes off. So I think I might even just make this wall section come out a little bit further potentially, kind of end over here up on this side of the base, but then just kind of like go off into and then just kind of end it at a point almost, as opposed to having like this other little bit that makes the archway. The other option is that I could actually just go with more of a solid wall behind them, which is, this is just the offcut from that arch itself. Something kind of curved could also work out pretty well. I don't know, chat, what do you think? Which direction do you think I should go in terms of, flat wall behind them with some techie bits and a lot of texture to kind of like set the scene? That could also give me more surface for some of these lightsabers to be reflecting off of. Probably more of Dooku's than Yoda's, as Yoda's is further out and away from the wall. Or I go with this kind of archway action. A lot more negative space, and it kind of divides up the composition in halves, which is kind of nice in a duel as well, because you've got, kind of two halves of this situation going on. Flat wall probably has more potential. Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that too. Yeah, you could just put a lot of texture and a lot of cool bits on that. Okay. Well, I think for now, for like the next 15 minutes at this point, while I make that decision how that wall is actively going to look, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this material here on the base and on this wall section that I mentioned before. So this is pre-mixed sanded tile grout. We got some of this stuff right here. And I'm going to just dab some of this stuff on, but I'm going to use, as I lean back, I'm going to use a sponge to apply it. So this is going to help me keep a nice irregular kind of stucco-y pattern on top of it. And this is all just kind of like a general experiment to just see like, is this how I want it to look? How is this turning out? And I like to do these kind of tests, when I'm trying new textures and new materials. So I'll go ahead and apply some of this material here. This stuff is also kind of water soluble. One thing you got to be careful of with this though is that if you're using foam core like this, this can warp. So you don't want to really soak it in water. You want to have just a little bit here and there. And if you're really concerned about it, while it dries, you could tape it to a flat surface. So I could take this and I could tape down these sections here, and that's going to hold it kind of in place. It's kind of like if you're ever working on like watercolors or things like that, you always kind of tape the paper down, because the water will cause the paper to kind of buckle and do some weird things. So I'm just going to kind of apply some of this stuff on here in general. Kind of get this mashed down, and then I'll use my sponge to kind of work out the texture. And I got a little bit too much water there, so I'm just going to use my brush to kind of soak up some of that excess and wipe it off on a rag that I have off camera here. And I like this stuff quite a bit. It's like great filler, if you're joining foam together, or if you're just having buildings that are attached to a base, like that you might make out of Masonite or MDF or something like that. It's just a really good, inexpensive filler that's got a slight texture that you can apply, and then you can just use water and a brush to really smooth it out effectively. Great material. That's an interesting idea, Carter 22. Kind of combine the two, so you'd have like almost a an archway, and then behind it have another wall that would have a little bit more. It give you a little bit of depth. You'd have to. I don't have a ton of space, like looking vertically, where that could go. So I mean, your back wall could be here, and then your arch could be like very close to them, I suppose. It's interesting though. Let's mock it up and see how it looks. So say you've got your archway like this, and then you've got another wall back behind them, kind of suggesting a corridor or something. It's pretty cool. Maybe this wall even just goes at like a different angle and it kind of wraps around or something like that. That's another possibility. Yeah, I'll have to experiment with it and just kind of figure it out. That's just kind of part of the whole plan, I think. I set out in with having these two miniatures squaring off with that in mind, and then I think I want to be pretty referential to the scene. I mean, I've already kind of committed to doing the floor texture that you saw in the film. You definitely see a big archway like this, but it is so massive that it couldn't quite fit onto the base that I have currently. Just going to get this kind of spread in throughout here. And I'm just kind of dabbing this on, just like a little bit of a stippling motion with an old ratty brush. And make sure that you wash your brush out really well, because if this stuff dries in it, it is done for. Don't let your brush dry with the tile grout in there, otherwise it is finito. Okay, and then I'm just going to dip my sponge in a little bit of water just to kind of soften it up a little bit. Yeah, maybe like kind of that corridor thing. It's going to make it feel a little bit intense and a little bit more intimate. And a lot of that atmosphere is just really going to kind of sell the setting. Those kind of little scenery elements and stuff we have on there. Sponge this stuff around a little bit. Looks like I've got some areas on there. I don't know if you can see it. You can kind of see a little bit of the grit there that's on it. But I have some kind of like low spots and high spots that I want to kind of even out a little bit. So we'll take a little bit more of this material. Tile grout. I'll kind of sponge that stuff on there. Move this stuff around a little bit. Try to get it pretty even. I mean, I don't want it to be so heavily irregular in texture and have kind of like bare spots and light spots. It seemed like the environment that they were in was pretty well crafted, I suppose, even for like that kind of Geonosis style architecture. There's a lot of kind of adobe and stucco and stuff, but there's still some elements in there that were very well refined and looking pretty nice. I imagine Dooku would expect no less than to have some well crafted digs for him to park his starfighter in. Cool, so that texture will work in general. I'm kind of running out a little bit of time here. That we might possibly eventually get Jango Fett. I think that there are so many awesome Star Wars characters. I think that we want to do them all. It's just a question of prioritization and also what's good for the factions in general. Trying to like pick and choose. It's always a tough decision. Everybody's got their favorites. Jango Fett would be awesome. That would definitely be very cool. But I feel, what the Separatists need in particular are more inexpensive commander options. They've got the T-Series tactical droid. They've got another one coming up after that. But I think, more inexpensive characters for them would be a really good addition to the faction. But it's all about what the developers decide on, how they want it, what direction they want to go with it. There's so many different options that we can go with, and so many things on the horizon. We'll get to everything eventually. But I agree, Mandalorians are great in general. I just love that armor style. Jango Fett's a really cool character. Definitely neat stuff. Admiral Trench, super cool. Asajj, super. See, like there's so many great options, right? Like it's tough to pick and choose one. But we are steadily working on a lot. We're committed to lots and lots of characters and lots more products for Legion and our other games. Okay. Yeah, so we've got this texture here. Once this dries, I think, once you get a little bit of paint and a dry brush on there, it's really going to start to pop out and show itself off. So I'm just going to add a few more little rocks here on to the base just to kind of flesh some of this stuff out. And then I'll just experiment a little bit more with the foam core and get ready for next week. And we'll come back and we'll revisit this project. I'll have Yoda primed up. I might even have him painted. We've already kind of gone through the Yoda painting process a couple different times, so I figured I wouldn't really focus too much on painting Yoda, and instead spend a little bit more time on the crafting of the diorama and just like my general approach and philosophy on the composition of it all, the setup of it, the materials I'm using, that sort of thing, just for something a little bit different, just to kind of shake it up a little bit. I'm sure we'll be coming back and revisiting and doing some more painting of these characters as well. I certainly am looking forward to painting Yoda myself. Be very cool. The decision I have to make, because I'm kind of committing to doing kind of an Arctic themed Wookiee force, is if I want to do Yoda in like a snow theme and what that might look like to go along with him. But I'm not 100% on Yoda with the Wookiees yet. I'm not sure. Definitely doing a chieftain in there. Definitely doing some air speeders. Probably going to do some rebel veterans in there too, in their snow gear. Tauntauns gotta be in there. And boy, I'll probably just start running out of points at some point. I don't know if Yoda's gonna have a place in the list, but I'll paint him for it, regardless. Just gonna put another rock over here. One kind of closer to the edge there. And I think because those rocks are pretty similar in size, just slide that over. Or just eject it into space. Super glue sets up real fast. It's like, again, it's kind of the spacing of those rocks, trying to figure out the best way to do it. It's a little off camera, can't quite see it. So yeah, we'll put that right up next to the other rock, so it's got a little bit more of an irregular spacing than the other rock that's over there. A couple more little ones. And I know that on the horizon we'll be introducing the theme of dioramas to our monthly painting challenges. So just as a reminder, we do every month we've got a different Star Wars Legion painting challenge that happens. Right now it is Special Forces. Last month it was heavy units. We posted a number of the staff picks from those on social media. They were great. People went above and beyond on all their vehicles that they did for Legion for that. They turned out awesome. And I think that, on the horizon we'll be doing a diorama category as well. So if you're excited about dioramas and thinking about that sort of thing, start to plan yours now, because we're definitely going to be doing one of those in a challenge coming up here in the future. Well, that is where I got to today. I sunk some magnets in here. I've got, these miniatures can also attach to their base if I want to. They can pop off. They can be attached onto the diorama as well. I filled in and created some rocks here with the epoxy sculpts and have a good basis for this. I think the next step is just figuring out what the backdrop is going to look like, and I am looking forward to getting back to that next week. So as a reminder, we are streaming every week from Tuesday through Friday. Make sure to come back and join us next week, and we're going to be covering a whole bunch of really cool miniatures, a lot of different techniques, a lot of different things to be for people to get excited about. So thanks again for joining me. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and I'll see you next time.